with the EU Unified Defense Force, what they're planning to do in the occupation in North Africa. I came in with my information about the increased rainfall on a 2,000-year pattern right over the old Roman grain-growing areas, and then a lot of light bulbs went on between all of our minds there.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Hello and welcome to Circle of White Light Radio with myself, Alan James. Good evening and hello to everybody on the chat room just logging in there. I hope you have a good show tonight. We've loads of information to talk about. My guest on the show tonight is a chap called David DuByne, and David has been on OIM before. David is the creator of Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube and Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, which discusses societal changes as our Earth enters deeper into the Eddy Grand Solar Minimum, a 400-year cycle in our sun which will affect everyone on our planet due to never-ending food prices, rises and economic downturns. While acting as a coffee buyer in Myanmar's central Shan state, David noticed cold weather losses to new planting, top leaf kill, and frost and bean density decrease from below normal temperatures. With the Grand Solar Minimum intensifying, we need to begin discussions on grain yield decreases, jet stream shifts, cloud cover increases with heavier wind and rain events, create food storages and crush the global economy as food prices triple by 2021. With that said, where is your opportunity in these times of danger? Good evening, David. How are you doing?
Doing well. I'm glad you read that. That was kind of a good synopsis of where we sit. And if you haven't seen across the planet, those grains are doing exactly what you're talking about. Losses everywhere you look.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into it because earlier on we did a quick audio check to make sure everything was okay. And we actually got into a fully fledged interview talking about stuff. And we said, we better hold off and talk about stuff on the show tonight. Plus, we're going to do a bit of testing. As part of the chat that we had, myself and David were talking about free energy devices and the Tesla switch and magnetic motors. And just at that time, as we are on Skype talking, funny, the communication channels start having problems. David couldn't hear me, I couldn't hear David. There was a scratchy noise on Skype. And as soon as we stopped talking about free energy devices, the quality of the call got better. Amazing. So we're going to be talking about that later on. So we'll just see how we get on with the communication channels with that. But is there anything else you want to add to your bio? Because that's a bio from the last time you've come on. Is there anything that you want to add to that before we get into the subject matter?
And speaking of cycles, my new book with my co-author Bill Porter, Climate Revolution, a must-read for understanding our sun-driven climate. As we progress deeper into this new Eddy Grand Solar Minimum, weather extremes leading to global food scarcity and higher food prices are here now. This book describes the expected changes, how to survive and thrive during future challenging times, and also practical preparations. The entire book is interactive with over 250 links. You can click and go out to the scientific aspect of what we're talking about with the repeating cycles in this Grand Solar Minimum. The science is explained so you understand the mechanisms. The solutions are there because we know we're going to face these exact same problems again that were faced in the Maunder Minimum, the Sporer Minimum, the Wolf Minimum. Find designs for building greenhouses, grow guides, beam soil techniques, as well as bioreactors to create your own growth hormones for the soil. Available now, the new Adapt 2030 Climate Revolution. The link's in the description box below.
I would. Now, since I was in your neck of the woods just at the beginning of May with Alternative View 10, that was another great leap forward for me to be in front of those amazing speakers. And then also I had a chance to speak at LeakCon 2019 in Denver about this same group of Grand Solar Minimum minds coming together for solutions. So 2 different conferences within May. Tapestry was more fully laid in after hearing with the EU Unified Defence Force what they're planning to do in the occupation in North Africa. I came in with my information about the increased rainfall on a 2,000-year pattern right over the old Roman grain-growing areas, and then a lot of light bulbs went on between all of our minds there. Felt that I was, absorbing more than I was giving because all these pieces suddenly seemed to click and fit in. And AV10, wow, that just filled my tapestry in as far as the missing pieces that I needed to get more complete kind of synopsis and future look at where we're going and how they're going to be more control as we move forward in the world. So many types of control that I'd never considered before, but then there's so many opportunities sitting on the other side if you're able to become more self-sufficient and find solutions to help people along in this time.
So from the last time you came on, I know you've been at the AV conference, where are we now at the moment? What's the snapshot of the planet? And where are we regarding the Grand Solar Minimum?
You do look around, you can obviously see some intensification. I mean, everywhere you look in the news these days, it's always about the strongest floods ever, the last 500 years, 2,000 years, 150 years, the coldest blistering springs, delayed planting, massive flooding all across the Middle East. And the thing is, areas that don't normally get massive rainfalls are the places that you're reading about most in the news that are getting absurd amounts of rain. You know, a year's worth of rain in 2 hours in Ghana, these kind of places. You don't normally think about this. Iran, all-time record floods. And what's so interesting about the Iran floods is even the accounts of the Silk Road traders, we're going back several thousand years, never talked about these types of massive floods. So obviously we're getting into a more powerful, heavier cycle. Just the feeling in general. I mean, the sun's changing electromagnetically, and we're receivers as well, antennae. So our feelings and intuition and energy is also changing along with the sun. And I've really noticed myself personally around me taking a look. You mentioned the Metallica concert you went to, but I noticed just more people waking up and they understand that something's different, but they can't put their finger on it. And that's what I noticed an acceleration in, is a lot more people searching out for answers now, a lot more people willing to take a look at different information that weren't even just a year ago as to the causation of all these incredibly strange events we're seeing across the planet.
Time and time again, we see the changes that are going on, and one of the things we said we do with you, David, is that once a year or so we'll get you on, talk about the weather changes. Now, last year, in 2018, we had the beast from the east that came in, and we hadn't had something like that since 1982, and we had severe snow. I was blocked in because I live in a village for 3 days, couldn't get out, so we had really, really extreme weather here last winter. And then when the summer came, we had extreme heat, and we had droughts, and there was hosepipe bans and everything else. And then we thought, based on that the following year, which would be 2019, that we'd have the same thing. But we didn't have a bad winter in 2019, and so far the summer has been pretty much average Irish weather, where you see the sun, the rain is warmer, but it's still kind of miserable. We're not really having that good a summer so far anyway. So it seems to have settled down back to its normal routine, from last year. So last year was quite extreme. Now, the thing is that going to change? Are we going to be getting more of them extremes? Is that going to escalate? So maybe we won't get it this year, but maybe we'll get it next year, the year after. And from then on, it'll probably be every year from then on. Do you see something like that happening?
Well, if you take a look at what's currently, I guess, the situation in the planet, the United States and Canada are having the wettest year ever recorded and the lowest amount of crop output in field planting acres ever recorded, even less by 20 million acres than what was done in 1938. So we have to even go back to 1938 to find such a small amount of acreage planted, and then we're going to reduce from that. And now Australia turning into a net wheat importer. Remember, they used to export millions of tons, but now they're an importer. And we're having all these different weather anomalies now, over where you're at. You're just so blessed with that temperate climate due to the ocean circulation currents. Those are slightly shifting right now. But when we go back over into continental Europe, if you go over to East Europe, oh my gosh, the winds this year along Croatia, and you get up into Slovenia and the Balkans, and the massive rains now that are affecting 50% of the field planted area in Bulgaria and Romania. Because I've been like a vulture following around to see where the corn losses are, because I'm really following corn at the moment. Taking a look at French corn production reduced, Eastern Europe reduced, United States greatly reduced down to absurd levels. Got the army worm outbreak across China. You got the droughts in China. Not looking too good for crop production globally in terms of grains, but you seem to have that Goldilocks sweet spot happening right there. But that equatorial vortex pulling up over your area. So everybody's familiar with the polar vortex. You hear about that. It's the cold weather. Well, there's also something that's been forming in these last couple of years called the equatorial vortex, where you're getting that same kind of obscure movements of jet streams pulling into different ways and places, but this is coming from the equatorial region, so obviously it's going to be warmer. So when you get these blasts of heat, and another thing you'll notice too, right across where you're at there, going over into Europe, it seems the jet streams are vertical now. They're not any way horizontal or kind of bending like you see in the nice graphics that they have on the news. It seems that these jet streams marching across our planet have turned vertical. They're just north-south orientation, specifically, as it comes across the Atlantic and then moves over through Europe after it sweeps over the Isles there. But yeah, we're seeing some strange anomalies.
Well, the weather is strange, all right. And talking about the weather, next week, the guest on the show is Harry Rhodes, and Harry and his team tend to try and fix the weather as much as they can or help out where they can regarding floods and droughts, because we know about the HARP technology and we know they can change and manipulate the weather, whether it's geoengineering or using HARP technology or whatever technology they have to do it. And what Harry and his team try and do is try and equalize that in some way with the technology they have using the Wilhelm Reich technology. So Harry's going to be on the show next week, and something that I asked Harry to do. Unfortunately, we have to do a bit of a post-mortem, but we looked at the long-range weather forecast for the concert, and the long-range weather forecast did predict that it was going to be raining. So I said to Harry, well, why don't we do a little bit of an experiment? Why don't we get Harry and his team to focus their translators on Slane in County Meath to see if they can change the weather? And see whether we can do anything. Now, I haven't spoke to Harry yet about it and what happened with his team, but I did take some footage of what the weather was like. And unfortunately, although it didn't rain on a regular basis, it kind of rained for about 5 minutes and then stopped. And it did that 3 times, and then it was okay for the rest of the evening. So was that a win or was it not a win? I don't know, because actually it still rained. But it didn't rain consistently for the evenings. I'll be speaking to Harry next week about that and see what happened. So that's what's going on as well. And if you look at Harry's YouTube site, he obviously talks about the Gulf Stream and the polar vortex and the things that he's doing, trying to equalize what they're doing with this HARP technology.
I was of the volition that because of the wandering magnetic poles, as you know, the poles are, starting to clip along much faster than anticipated. So there's something with the magnetic shielding of our planet going down. And then we have this grand solar minimum onsetting at the exact same time here. So I was trying to explain that with the more highly charged atmosphere, these HARP programs and geoengineering and whatever types of energy weaponry that's being used is piggybacking on top of a natural cycle to try to get a greater outcome. I was trying to explain this too at AV10, that without the more highly charged atmosphere that we have right now, due to the ionizing, we got the amazing amount of cosmic rays coming through. Our atmosphere is more highly charged. If you haven't seen the different types of, red sprites and blue jets and ground to sky lightning and all these discharge factors that are happening just because there has to be an equilibrium between the sun and our Earth, and the sun has stepped down, but our Earth is still more highly charged. It's trying to release that energy and come to equilibrium. But I was saying inside that, the military applications, they're trying to run on top of a natural cycle to boost the output, if you will. Because if they were going to try to do these, if they did the exact same thing that they would, let's say they did experiment A or whatever that they're running up in the skies. If they were to do it in the 1990s when our sun was at a 3,000-year high in solar activity, our charged atmosphere would be very minimal, so their outcome would be minimal as well. But here we are, march forward a couple decades, and we come into this incredibly highly charged atmosphere at the moment. So whatever they're doing electrically and wave frequency-wise, they're getting more bang for their buck, if you will. So trying to mitigate that to try to reduce the outcome. So that's how I'm familiar with his work, because I was coming at it from a different direction on how to, let's say, minimize, because they're trying to piggyback on top of a natural cycle. At least these powers that be that are running around with all their frequency-directed energy devices.
Well, we're going to be talking about frequencies because myself and David were earlier on talking about technology. And David, I know that you're getting more involved in 5G and understanding the dangers of 5G. And we've had Mark Steele on the show a couple of times talking about how bad 5G is. And one of the things I mentioned was about the movie The Kingsman, where basically everybody gets a free SIM globally, and they have the use of this frequency in the chip so they can make people more violent. And one of the things that we had Barry Trower on, who's a UK physicist scientist, and he told us that Tetra, which is what the Gardaí or the police in Ireland use, frequency makes them prone to violence, makes them more violent. Which kind of fits in with the whole Kingsman thing, and we know they use Hollywood to tell us what they want to do. What's your take on what you've seen with 5G? I know you probably listened to Mark's talk over there, but what else have you noticed, and how is that affecting the bigger picture?
Yeah, Mark really filled in a couple ideas for me too, and I had a chance to talk with him a couple of times. Brilliant mind there. So just for all of you out there listening, in the United States, it's not very well known what this 5G tech is. They've really kept it under wraps, that it's just something for faster internet, it's for the Internet of Things. They never talk about the house fires caused by the overlapping waves within your house itself from all the smart devices that are causing instantaneous combustion. But my whole thing was, with this Grand Solar Minimum, is that with the food prices rising in the future, there's definitely going to be a lot of societal unrest.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
Like when we get to the bottom, say 10% of a society or 15% that's barely struggling along, they're using food assistance from the government. When these prices that we're starting to see now, these corn products are going to start skyrocketing up off the charts here. I mean, we're going to be looking at doubling corn prices by the end of December. So when we get to the lower segments and the lowest earners in any society, I don't care where you are on the planet, they're not going to be able to afford their food. And then as we march forward to 2023, 2024, this is when I had anticipated some of the greatest crop losses with the biggest shocks to our society starting right then. Because I was thinking, all right, now you're going to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people on the streets protesting, if not just taking, criminal action to break into wherever it would be to get a hold of food, because it's going to be A, expensive, B, not widely available, and the choice will not be there either to what you have today. So I was thinking, how are they going to control everybody? Because even the minimal amount, let's just say you had the maximum amount of police and they even had the reserve forces for all the military and all the police brought in, there still would only be a fraction of the amount of police and military needed to control an entire country. And I was focused on the United States because, we have over 300 million people there. But how are they going to control everybody? And I was thinking, our soldiers are not going to open fire on hungry women and children trying to get into a store. They're not going to be opening fire when women and children come to the gates looking for food. And I was thinking, how are they going to control everybody? But then after this whole 5G was explained on how they're going to put the grid out, and then Mark so eloquently explained about the carrier wave that you can have another frequency wave riding on top or within that carrier wave. And these are the same exact frequency that is used on top of the Humvees that are for crowd control, where you see those dishes on top of the Humvees. That's the exact same thing, but it's at a much broader scale where they can cover an entire city or an entire country. I think this is one of the reasons that Trump went in and said no more chips from Huawei, because if you could decimate a country and incapacitate an entire population from a keyboard somewhere, I sure wouldn't want a foreign government in charge of what they can do with that. So I think so he's going to want to use that tech to control our own people versus allowing maybe a China backdoor in to control our people using frequency weapons. And this is kind of where I woke up to the whole grand scheme of things, if you will, moving forward with 5G. And that's kind of one facet of the diamond that I see. I mean, there's all these facets inside this usage of it. And just how many layers do you want to go deep on the onion on this?
Well, one of the things you just said there was interesting, is that when you said about you don't believe soldiers will actually shoot a woman or, with her child trying to, get food or something. But one of the things that we heard, this is why they probably want the European army, is an Irish soldier, like an American soldier, would be probably hesitant to shoot on their own people. And that's why they want European armies, which will be made up of different cultures. So if you have French soldiers or you have Italian soldiers coming in, there's no kind of connection there. So they'll just see it as a job that has to be done, bang. That's it. And so that's another way how they can do that, because what they want is for the Irish people or people in general to retaliate to what's going on. And then they'll go, yeah, well, we had to bring in martial law because people start getting violent. It's a kind of order of chaos. It's their old Illuminati approach again. So problem, action, solution. Basically cause the problem. People say, what are you going to do about it? Oh, we'll have a solution. We'll put troops on the road to manage it because there's been a lot of break-ins and a lot of violence and everything else. One of the things we talked about earlier on was also, we mentioned about being self-sufficient. And the great documentary out there by National Geographic, American Blackout, gives you a sample of a prepper and a couple in a condo who, are giving out about the maintenance man, where's the power gone, because the power goes down for 10 days. And on day one, the neighbours are having a barbecue and cooking the frozen food so it doesn't go to waste. And day 3, they're killing each other for a tin of tuna. And one of the things is about self-sufficiency, and myself and David earlier on talked about this, and the more people are self-sufficient and don't rely on the government, the better. But the problem is there's a number of issues that have to be addressed. One is the growing of the food, which I'm going to get David to talk about now in a minute, because you're doing stuff, David. The backup of having power to do things, which is something that myself and Steve have done. And also, you need to protect yourself, because it's not the government, as John Irwin said, it's not the government or the police that's going to be the issue. It's going to be a next-door neighbour, because if they know you have food and they need food, they'll kick down your door and they'll kill you for it. So you need to be able to protect yourself. So I think what we should do is start off with the food and being able to develop your own food. And would you call what you're doing aquaponics?
Not so much. The aquaponics would involve having fish under there to be able to bring it up through the clay pebbles to soak through. Mine's just more vertical tube agriculture. So what I have is 8 different tubes, And on the outside, it is stainless steel. And then on the inside, it's coconut coir, coconut fiber. But as you go down the tube, there's 14 holes drilled into it. It's about a 5.5 foot long tube, and there's 8 of them. And all you do is take a small DC motor and then pump the water up, and then gravity takes over and runs down and then drips through all 8 tubes. There's nutrient mix in it, obviously. Just you go buy some NPK fertilizer. You can go ahead and take that in solution and just mix it in the water and let it dissolve. It'll still have enough nutrient mix in there, but I'm using some specialized stuff that was designed for these types of drip-through systems. And then once it falls through all the coconut coir and the roots, it goes 15 minutes for every 2 hours, turns off. It's an automated system, and it only takes 20 to 25 liters of water, and then you can run that for a full month before you need to change it. And then we're having some remarkable success. It took us a little bit to figure out what types of lettuces grew best and which ones the pests didn't like to eat so much. So there was a learning curve. About 2 months to figure out what grew best in the conditions where we are and, really where to set it up. And did we want to put nets on it to try to prevent the butterflies from laying eggs everywhere? But are working with nature in this one at the same time.
So you showed me a photo of it, and that's interesting. And you have limited space as well, so people can do it even on limited space.
Yeah, that's true. That was the whole thing, is I'm trying to do this whole documentary of an urban garden in a city to show that you can do it in a city. Now, our next step is going to be to bring it indoors. And what we're trying to do is, this takes a little more power because you're going to need some dehumidifiers, you need fans, and then also the pump, it's the same. It's just a small pump. DC motor, by the way, it draws water up better because you need it to go up about 6 feet off the ground. And bringing it indoors has a different little set of challenges there because of the humidity, and that's one of the detriments for your plants. And this is where we got in to start trying to think about using magnetic motors, Perendev Magnetic Motor, to try to drive all that, because we're anticipating grid down for sure. Not the entire world where everything's going to go down, but just there'll be regional blackouts, and they may last for longer, weeks, days, months, not sure. But absolutely, you'd have to consider that where you live is going to go down power-wise for some period of time. Now, the best thing about gravity is it works even if you pour the water in through a siphon or a funnel, it'll still go down the tubes, but you're going to have to, be on it pretty much every 2 hours to drop that water through there. But Perendev motors, really simple. There's all kind of schematics out on the net, pretty easy to build. It's just using magnets that are pushing off each other to spin. And you're using just an alternator from a car. Because you talked about these voting machines that got recycled. Turn those things into planter boxes or whatever. Go down. If you can find a junkyard, go get an alternator from a car. And not this year's models, because you want to get something a little bit older. 1980s, 1970s, those are really the best ones. Especially if they're not all galled up and the copper's not been eroded and balled up. Or they call it galling when you get some decomposition of the copper inside there on the brush. So if you can find a decent alternator from like a 1970s motor, that would be incredible, because that's exactly what we're using to charge. And then going from the alternator right over into a battery, that's quite easy. But it's to get those magnets to spin, you have to have them at a 36-degree angle as you drill in and need your CNC lathe. And somebody told us to try to 3D print the next model that we're working on. But these magnetic motors is the way we're going to go. And what, I tried to present that in the AV10 conference, and I also presented it in Denver, and there was a little too much interest in what we had done or what we were trying to accomplish. And all the questions that kept being asked: are you going to sell it? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to sell it as a kit? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to sell the motor? Are you going to sell? Tell us about the motor. What are you doing with the motor? How about with the motor? They were so concerned about this magnetic motor that we were working on prototyping. What are you doing with the motor? Are you going to give it away for free power? Are you going to give everybody free power? What are you going to do with it?
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.